Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome Elizabeth Percival to our podcast today. Elizabeth is a person I met recently who has had a very interesting life, and I just want to introduce her to you. Elizabeth, hi.
Hi,
Tell us a little about what's going on with you right now, and then later we'll talk about the good old days.
it's a deal. Um, I I am moving from northwestern North Carolina to Juneau, Alaska, where my son, my grandbaby, and my daughter has moved there recently. So I want to be near them. And I've lived here for 40 years. I raised my children here in northwestern North Carolina and southwestern Virginia, which is one county above here. So this is kind of a Virginia, North Carolina environment, special place. It's a wonderful place. And I'm going through all of my belongings and packing them and letting go of them. I got a lot of suitcases. This goes back farther, but my mother lived through the Russian Revolution and through the Depression. So she never threw anything away. So I was trained to not throw anything away.
Well,
And
you don't know when you might need it.
you don't know when you might, that is the phrase that reverberates in my mind constantly, but I might need it. And that time when I gave it away and then I needed it proves
Right.
that. Like
Yes, sure.
it's just in there. I've got a lot of suitcases and I look at them and they're like, this is good quality. I might need this sometime. Maybe I'll go on a business trip and need one of those suitcases where you can put a suit in it. By Land's End, it's really good suitcase. And I keep saying over and over again, people say to me, imagine someone else enjoying it. It's not getting thrown away. It is passed on to someone who will now be using it. And that helps sometimes, but not as often as I'd like.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are in the same predicament of having accumulated a lot of stuff during our lives. And then suddenly we're either moving to be near kids, and especially grandkids, or we're downsizing for one reason or another, or we're deciding we're going to spend the rest of our lives in a camper and drive around the country.
It's, I have imagined that, but I I think I'm getting it down to about half of what I had. And I'm moving into a very small apartment, but it has this huge heated garage right next door to it. That was a truck garage. So I'm going to put a lot of art stuff and books and things in there. And eventually I know it will get less and less. I'm doing my best and loving myself through it. That's what I'm working on.
Well, that's a good way to go. And so if you lived there for most
Since
of your life,
1979. Actually, I'm a New Yorker. I married a guy from this county that I live in, Ashe County, North Carolina, in 1979. And that's how I got here. And my sister, I met him through my sister. My sister had already met a guy from Raleigh, North Carolina, and she was living down here. And so then I moved down here. Eventually, my mother moved down here. One of my other sisters lived here for a while. So this was really, besides this extraordinary community that I found, not on purpose, but there were a bunch of, let it be said, old hippies who found this county north of where I live, and this county too. There's a river that runs through here called the New River, one of the oldest rivers in the world, and very beautiful, beautiful river. And they were going to put a dam up here, and the community fought it, but they had bought a lot of land that was going to be flooded by the river. So when the dam failed, because of this movement by the community, they stopped this dam from happening. All of these properties were going for good prices. And so just so happened, a lot of people who were looking for back to the land kind of life found this area. And so this community emerged from that. I homeschooled my children in this community. Um, we had a volleyball game every Sunday at somebody's house, and they had a creek or a pond, and everybody was swimming in there. Some people with clothes, some people without clothes. It was a real hippie experience, but and also wonderful. I mean, I don't mean that it's not wonderful to be hippie. I mean, I was just talking to someone in this. I was 78 yesterday, and some girlfriends of mine had a party for me, and we were talking about how the person I was driving with, who used to live next door to me, we really raised our children together. Um, when I say next door, that's like a half a mile down the road at the next piece of land on a dirt
Ah,
road. That's when I say next door, it doesn't make definitely necessarily mean like I live in town now. We
not
all
three
live,
feet away.
yeah, we lived way out. And so she was saying that people say hippie, oh, you were a hippie. They have a certain attitude about it. And my daughter says, I am so proud that my mom was a real hippie. My daughter says that to me.
How
And
lovely.
it is lovely. And what was I just looking at something, in my looking at my phone in the morning when I wake up and going through YouTube things. I love things about theater and, just a whole range of, I have a lot of different interests. And somebody was talking about, oh, I was watching an interview with Crosby, Stills and Nash by Dan
Mhm.
Rather, which I had seen before, but I wanted to see it again because I loved the things that they said. And he said, you were considered like a hippie band. And they're like, well, we're proud of that because we stood for love as a possibility and peace and caring for the environment and having, stopping wars. And that had some influence on our life. And the importance of those things continues to this day. And these were all white haired guys. David Crosby died yesterday on my birthday. And I guess that's probably why I ended up watching that, to kind of honor him. And so I so I lived in this community of people with values that were like my values. And how
Mhm.
fortunate was I to find that in having met this guy from the mountains of North Carolina. And I didn't know I would find that when I moved here. It
Sure.
was a great blessing for me to have that.
Well, and so you're gonna just pack up and move to the other side of the country.
Yes, not only the other side of the country, it's another time zone. Like it's 4 hours earlier there, not just 3 hours like North Carolina, like California. And in order to get my car there, I'm going to have to drive it across the country and then take a ferry or a barge all the way up from Washington to Juneau. You can only get into Juneau on a plane or a boat. You can't drive there. It's stuck against the side of North America. Um, it's that little strip of Alaska that's kind of next to Canada. And
Right.
behind it, it's a little town, and behind it is glaciers and wilderness forever. It's a
Oh, that just
pretty,
sounds spectacular.
it really is. It's one of those places where I remember friends telling me that they drove up through Canada in their VW bus years ago. And they were old by then, or pretty old, maybe their 60s. And they brought back these pictures and they would say, and here's another spectacular view. And here's another spectacular view. Every view you have is just extraordinary, whether it's mountains or the the water or just whales, and it's
Ah,
eagles, ravens. It's just really something.
so there's something to look forward to there.
Oh, really? And not only that, when I'm there, I'm literally in bliss. That's why I'm moving there. Because when I went to visit my son about a year ago, the entire time that I was there, I was experiencing being in bliss,
Wow.
partly because of my family and partly because of the place.
Mhm.
My son has a beautiful, loving family, and his mother-in-law lives next door. She's going to be across the street, and and she's one of my favorite people. You know, it's not like I'm going into something difficult. Um, I'm just having a time, letting go.
Well,
Who knew?
so are you getting together with friends or
Yes,
having
I am. But I also am pretty hermity. I've become a hermit I since COVID, and I like being a hermit. I didn't get COVID. I haven't had it. And at this party, I was not wearing a mask. I was pretty amazed at myself for not wearing a mask. I just trusted all these people to be safe. And this is one of the first times I've been in really, I go to the doctor, I go to the grocery store, but I don't go to parties like I used to. And I was a very social human. And I don't consider this a diminishment. I just consider it what's happening at this time. And I'm accepting this is what the way I'm living right now. I want to be careful, and I'll just continue to do that. It's just a choice that I've made. And but I stay in touch with people electronically and on the phone, and women come over and help me put my stuff away and all that. And I literally, I already have a moving company. They're coming here before March 1st and taking all this stuff there. So I do have a deadline that will help me.
yes,
And then I'm going to
yes.
drive across the country and visit friends on my way there.
Oh, that'll be fun.
So a little bit of that other dream of having what they would call in Britain a caravan and driving around the country. I had that dream too, but I in my young life, I did a lot of stuff and a lot of traveling, and I didn't own anything. I had a box of records and a box of books in my mom's attic. And every time I would accumulate things and I'd go on another trip, I'd give my sister, who was already had a house and was married in San Francisco, I'd just give her all my stuff every time I left. She still got things that I gave her. Her coffee table I gave her in 1970. So so I lived like that. I lived with nothing. And then when I got married, I started just accumulating things, and I love all my things. So people help me. That's what I've discovered. If I can say to somebody, I have 4 containers, glass containers full of shells, and I want to bring them with me because they're East Coast shells and they won't have shells like that there. And I want to do art with them. And my son's mother-in-law said, well, have you done anything with them in the past 10 years? And I was like, well, a little bit. So what we decided is I'm going to keep 1 jar of them. Like that kind of process of letting go, it helps for me to talk to someone else about it.
Sure. So, Elizabeth, tell me a little bit about your younger hippie years when you
Well,
were in San Francisco, for example.
well, let me start a little before that, because I am a boomer, right? And I'm not just a hippie. I'm a person who grew up in the 50s. I'm barely a boomer. I was actually born in 1945. So officially, I don't know, the World War II generation. I was born in January of 1945. My dad went into the army. He was called into the army after I was born. And there's a whole lot of story there, but I lived most of my young life on Long Island in New York. I went to college in Hofstra. I was a drama major. And during that time, I worked at the World's Fair in New York. And I met a guy who was from San Francisco, and I fell in love with him. He was at Columbia University, and we were together for a couple of years, as students and all that. And so he went back to San Francisco when he left school in 1966, and I just went out there to be with him. And so before that, I wasn't a hippie. I was a person who was in college, who was a drama major. And I did go to the Village in New York. That was like a big thing. I had a 55 Chevy that my dad had given to me bought it for $350. And so my friends and I would drive into the city, and my brother had a red uh, Ford Mustang with a convertible top, a hard top you could take off. And he
Oh,
let me drive it into the city sometimes. I'll never forget driving in from the east side and being at a traffic light and just laying back in that thing and looking up at the lights of New York City. That's one of
mm,
those images that just is in my mind. So, we'd go to New York and hang out in the village and hear folk singers and drink coffee. And I wasn't a big drinker. People in the theater drink a lot after they do rehearsals and stuff. I'd go to bars in Long Island and drink a 7 Up while they were drinking whatever they were drinking. But I ended up in San Francisco, and this is how I got there. I was in an art class. I was taking an art class my senior year, and there was a model. It was a model, a life drawing class. And this model was from New York City. And I was talking about wanting to go to California. And she said she saw this ad in the Village Voice that someone had a bus, and I could go to California for $35 on this bus with other people. He was getting people together to drive there. I went with my mother to his apartment, or his mother's apartment in New York. He had bought a 1949 school bus and driven it across America and sold seats on it so he could come and visit his mother in New York. And now he was selling seats to go back home to California. And it was going to stop in San Francisco and then down to LA where he lived. Okay, so my mother thought this was a good idea. My mother said,
mm.
sure, do that. It's $35. It's cheap. Take advantage of it, She's a Russian Jew. And so I just looked exactly like my sister Nora when I did that. I sounded and looked exactly like her just there. And so I arrive in the West Village to get on this bus. I have my suitcase, I have bologna sandwiches, and I have a copy of the Tin Drum. That's and a comforter and a pillow. That's what I brought with me because I was going to be sleeping on this bus. And I get to the West Village, and it's a yellow 1949 school bus. And written on the side of it, painted on the side of it, is Wayward Travel Club. And on the back of the bus is written Wayward. So that's how I got to California, on this bus. The
Of
baloney,
wayward travelers.
I was a wayward traveler. And the bologna sandwiches started to go bad. I threw them out. I would eat chocolate ice cream with cream on top of it at the Howard Johnson's for breakfast because I was trying to save money. And I forgot to tell you the big thing. I had $50 before I left. And I asked my mother if they would give me, and my parents really did not have money. I went to college on scholarships, and I worked. And so I said, Mom, could you give me some money for my graduation present so I'll have money when I go there? And she said, no, we want to give you a watch. That's what my mother said. But I went anyway. I was going. I think I had about $7 when I got there. And I called my boyfriend, and when I got let off somewhere in San Francisco, I didn't know where. And I called my boyfriend, and he said, he didn't know I was coming, by the way. And he said,
Surprise!
I'm living with my parents. You can't stay here. And all my life I have said I have angels who have taken care of me, because I know a lot of people who came to San Francisco who got in really dicey situations. That never happened to me. I called a friend of a friend who I had met in New York. He said, oh yeah, come out here, and there's this house out in the Sunset in San Francisco that has students in it, and they rent rooms. So I rented a room there. And that house turned into a really hippie house. It wasn't when I moved, this was August 1966. People were just starting to take LSD. I took it in right about that time because someone said to me, it's going to be illegal next month, but it's legal now. So you should take it now. And
Oh,
that's why I
no
took it.
pressure.
I wasn't like, oh, I have to do this. It was just something I did. And it was an extraordinary experience. I had and I didn't even take it that many times. We had what I think was a good attitude about it, which was we saw that it was teaching our brains something about really who we could be as human beings, what was possible for human beings, that there was an expanded way of thinking and experiencing life. And so we took it very carefully. We would take 2 days and have this experience, and then I would say come down and come back into life and then go back to work on the third day. And that's how it was for me. It wasn't what I would say a recreational drug to me. It was an important expanding experience. And so that happened at that house. And of course, people were smoking grass. And I don't think I told you this when we talked before, but I became a topless dancer.
Oh my.
I had been a model, an artist model, to make money when I was in college. There was an art school in Hempstead, Long Island. My school was Hofstra University. So I worked as an artist model. And so I tried to do that when I got to California. I was going to work in a nursery school. I had a job in a nursery school back east, but I decided not to do that. I wanted to go to California. So I looked at being an artist model, and out there, you had to be in a guild to do that. And they had just finished doing the hiring people, getting into the guild for the next year. And it had already happened, and that wasn't going to happen for another year. So I was like, well, I can't do that. So I saw this ad to be an artist model in a nightclub. And it was, you sat there and an artist drew a picture of you while people were sitting there drinking. So I went to this agent, and he said, well, that job, I don't know what happened. He offered me this other job in this fabulous nightclub called the Roaring Twenties, this beautiful old building. So I ended up there as a topless dancer, and there was a band there called the Vagabonds. And the drummer was Dan Hicks, who later had a group called Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks. And they were fantastic, fantastic. So you've got these braids. They had this idea that we should all have characters. So I decided I would have braids, and I made myself a little loincloth, and I didn't even wear stockings because some of the places you danced were really slick. They were like a little table in between the chairs and tables where people were drinking. And I just bead myself. I looked like an American Indian. I danced like no tomorrow because that's just who I was. And my best conversation was this lady who came into the dressing room. She'd gone to the ladies' room, which was right next to our dressing room downstairs. And she came in and she said, I did not want to come here. My husband wanted to come here, but I really enjoyed watching you dance tonight. And I wanted to tell you that. I was like, yes. So I was an actress, I had studied dance, and I had studied theater, both in college and with different acting teachers in New York, and took ballet and lots of things in the summers between school terms. So, I brought all that to the table, and I did that for a while, and then I got a scholarship to study at the American Conservatory Theater. And then I auditioned and got the scholarship. And then I was in the company for a year. And then I had a spiritual teacher right after that, right after I was in the theater. I met my spiritual teacher, and I started traveling around the world doing what were called inner searches. We went to Switzerland. We went all the way around the world 1 year and went to India. I got to sit with the Dalai Lama. And that was the center of my life for a number of years. And I actually didn't have a man in my life when I did that. I had stayed with that man who became my hippie husband, the man I'd fallen in love with in New York. And then when I was in the theater, I met somebody else who I fell in love with. but that ended too right about the time that I started studying yoga and meditation. And so out of that, I went back home. I lived in Connecticut with my family and substitute taught, and eventually studied Montessori and was doing that. And then I met the man who I married here and came down here and started this life.
Well, that sounds quite adventurous. Um, you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation that you were in San Francisco and saw Bobby Kennedy.
That's true. Now that was during the excuse me. That was during the time that I was in the theater, and I was with that second man who I lived with. He was a dancer and an actor. I met him in the theater, and I remember I was sitting on his shoulders. I was up on his shoulders for this parade that Bobby Kennedy made through the streets of downtown San Francisco just before he went to LA. So I just remember, it really was that time where we really believed that the world could shift, that love could be important, that we could take care of each other. That Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy's death really put a pall on that on
Mhm.
our country. We went from this extraordinary optimism, although it also was a very intense time politically. I was not. I had friends who were politically active. Going back to this house we lived in the Sunset, we called this house the 11th Avenue Circus, that where everybody was together for a while. And there were people in that house who would go over to Oakland and protest people enlisting and being inducted into the army. Joan Baez was one of the people who did things like that. I didn't do that. I, as I said, kind of took a spiritual turn during that time. Later in my life, I'm fairly politically active now. And but that happened to me kind of after all of my kids and all that. Although there were some of the people in our community where I raised my kids who also were very politically active. I had the beliefs, I agreed with what they were doing. It just wasn't something that I was called to do myself. And what was your question?
I just was
Okay.
interested in the what it was like in San Francisco at
Okay.
that time.
Well, that's a good question. Because I was fortunate in that I got there in 1966, which was before the Summer of Love.
Yes.
It really had just unfolded. We would go down to Haight Street and go into stores that had, I got spiritual books there that I kept most of my life that were kind of unique from somewhere in the north of India, or there was a blossoming of spirituality that was beautiful. And of course, people were wearing these fabulous clothes. My boyfriend, who I had in the theater, had this fantastic. They wore Nehru jackets, which were kind of long Indian jackets. The guys did. They had like flared arms and a high collar. And this one
Right.
was Paisley. Paisley was a big thing. It's kind of like a little swirl. If you've ever seen a yin yang, it's like half
Right.
of a yin yang, a whole bunch of those. So half of a yin yang
Yes.
is a paisley. So it was all paisleys, and it was pinks and oranges and greens and yellows. And it was his jacket, but I used to wear it all the time because I loved it so much. And and I remember one time we heard this guy on the radio. So we had this house, right? And Ted, the guy who was my first boyfriend, the one reason I went there, he came and lived with me at that house. We lived together at that house. And uh, we heard this guy on the radio who said that he would come to someone's house and talk about enlightenment. So that was a big thing that started to happen there. People started to imagine that they could get enlightened. And I don't know if people even really knew what that meant, but it was something about expanding who you were, right? So
Right.
this guy came and sat in our house and talked about God and oneness. And we just sat there and listened to him. We were There was a band. Some of the guys in a band lived in the apartment below. There was a two-story house above and this apartment below. And the band was called the Flamin' Groovies. And they actually played 50s rock and roll music all the way through the 60s. And a couple of those band members still tour today. And so that was there. And then after people started taking drugs, some of the guys were living upstairs with the women, some of the women were living downstairs with the guys. It became a very open place, open, and people knew about it. And the manager for the Flamin' Groovies worked for Bill Graham, who had the Filmore Auditorium. So we had an opportunity to take these little 5x7 flyers with those wonderful Wes Wilson art on it, the bubble art that was famous in the 60s. We would have a whole pile of those. And if we would distribute them on Montgomery Street, which is the financial district of San Francisco, so every Thursday we'd go out and give out all these flyers. So we got to go to the Filmore for free every Saturday night. So I had the opportunity to see Big Brother and the Holding Company and the original oh gosh, the Jefferson Airplane, the original one with Signey before Grace Slick was part of it. And oh gosh, just the Doors, just everybody came through there. And it was just a good time. For us, it was just a good Saturday night. It's epic now, but we didn't know we were epic. We were just
Well,
doing what we were doing. This is what was happening, and it was cool. I'm on this Facebook site that's about things you remember from the 70s, and just today there was something about, okay, what's a phrase that you remember from that time? And I realized that I use them all the time. I say cool. I say that's groovy. I say, oh gosh, cool beans. I say cool beans all the time. I'm 78 years old, and I there was just a whole long list of them, and I was like, yes, that's when I lived. That's when my language was developed. Of course, some of it came from the 50s too, and being a child. And oh, we had those posters, those Wes Wilson posters, all over the house. Was kind of classic San Francisco Victorian house, and it had a bay window in the front and stairs that went up and several bedrooms on the side and a living room and a kitchen. And then upstairs there were front bedroom, back bedroom, and this middle area. And we put those posters all over the walls of that middle area. That's where the man who came and spoke to us, we kind of gathered up there. And I remember my boyfriend made a light box out of wood, little thin sticks of wood and rice paper, and he put things in it like I think he had a little statue of the David, the beautiful Michelangelo statue
yes.
from Florence. He had that sitting in there, and some ice cube trays, the middles of ice cube trays that were kind of squares. He had those there, and then he put a string of flashing lights in it. So it would project onto the wall these different images. And that's what they did in the Fillmore too. They had light shows that they took a concave piece of glass and put oil and water in it and colors and moved it around. And so if you ever see pictures of that time, you'll see these kind of pulsing things on the screen, and they would also project pictures of people, stuff that is very common now, but that really was developed during that time. The idea of a light show was created
Yes.
during that period. So I
So it was
watched,
multisensory. I mean, there was more of a multisensory feel.
yes, yes. And
Um,
there was one of those um, mirrored balls going around, and everybody was stoned, right? So that people were like, some people would just stand there and watch that stuff. There were people who didn't dance at all because they were so high that they were just, here's another term, digging it. They were just digging it. Or they'd say, I
right.
did. That was something people would say. So you could have a whole program on the language of that the flow of language from that time to now, and how it's some of it has stuck with us. And the thing that's so funny for me is that I'm an old lady now. So when I talk like that, it's humorous to young people that I still talk that way. It's like
Yes.
she's using that. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm old now. And it's okay. My mom used to say, I'm an 80-year-old, but I'm 80, but there's an 18-year-old in here. And
Yes.
that's how I feel now. I'm still that kid who got on that bus to California having no idea what she was going to do. I need to think about that more. That's who I need to be right now. I really don't need any of this stuff. I really don't. I could give it all away and get on a plane. I could do.
You could.
That's who I was then, you know. But
Hmm.
something happens to you. I mean, this is a boomer experience. Something happens to you in your life when you accumulate the things of your life, and you um I have a window up there sitting on that wardrobe. It's a green painted window with four panes in it. One of the panes is out. It is the window from the barn in my parents' house in Kent, Connecticut.
Hmm.
I have furniture from that house. I I like having those things, even though I know my kids don't care about them at all. I guess
Right.
for me to get that that it's about my life, I'm keeping them because I loved my life and I like remembering it, and I like having the um tokens, the symbols, the I don't know what the word is. They're physical
Well,
representations of my experience, is what they are.
yes. Well, when I was downsizing, I said to my daughter, I want those things. They talk to me.
They talk to me. Yes, that's exactly right. They talk to me, and I like those conversations. No, I, and maybe that's part of the reason that I'm a hermit, is that I, gosh, we're getting deep here, honey. I, yeah, I actually feel like crying a little bit um, because you get old however you want to. It's my old age. I get to do this the way I want to do it. If I want to save something that meant something to me, and part of it is that I am forgetting. I mean, if you at I've got a lot of rocks. I don't know, remember where I got those rocks. And if somebody told me, because I came from a pretty intellectual family, and my brother is a scientist. So like I knew I should be putting a little piece of tape on the bottom of every rock I got and saying where I was got it, because that's how you save stuff when you're a scientist. You have a little box with little squares in
Right.
it, you put the things in there. To me, they're more art because I'm more an artist. But I think I have one rock with a tape on from Stinson Beach in California when I took my daughter there. And the other ones, I'm like, I don't really remember where I got those. So those are
Right.
not talking to me. Those I can let go. And that's part of it. It's because my memory, I want to have these reminders of these things. And
Yes.
I get to do that if I want to. If it means lugging stuff across the country and giving it away in Juneau, so be it.
Well, Elizabeth, we're out of time, but I want to wish you the best.
Thank you.
I hope your trip is wonderful and that you find this to be a wonderful new chapter in your life.
Thank you. And so thank you so much for inviting me to do this. And I think what you're doing is really a lovely contribution to everyone, not just to boomers, but to anyone who wants to know who the heck we are. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, boomers, that's it for today. Bye.